Hey guys, it's Will from Learnerator, and in this edition of AP Micro Mondays, we're going to be reviewing what causes shifts in the demand curve. So, in thinking about shifts in the demand curve, it can really go one of two ways. You can either shift to the left or you can shift to the right. So in thinking about this, the best way to do it is by actually drawing out the graphs. So let's say we have our two scenarios in which we have our classic price on the y and quantity on the x. And let's say that we have our supply curve, and then our demand curve can shift to the left or the right. So the way to think about this is the first scenario could be you have your first demand curve, and then you have an upward shift or a shift to the right. And the alternative to that would be the opposite, which would be if the demand curve started out to the right of the second demand curve and then came inwards to the left. So this is a leftward shift, and then this is a rightward shift. And so what you want to think about is what is the situation in these two respective circumstances that would warrant this kind of market movement. So in thinking about this, let's first identify the changes in terms of the overall market. So first I'm going to change my color to blue, and then I'm going to highlight where demand intersects supply. So again, these are the supply curves. And so supply intersects here, and then supply intersects here in the second case. And so what's happened is you can see that P1 is here, P2 is here, Q1 is here, and Q2 is here. And therefore we have an outward shift in quantity as well as an upward shift in price. And so we see that right now we see an increase in the demand, or a rightward shift, leads to an increase in price as well as an increase in quantity. Now let's look at the contrary to that and the situation in which we shift leftward. So here the supply intersects the demand curve here, here it intersects here. And so now comparing the two, we have the first quantity here, we have the second quantity here, we have the first price here, the second price here. This is going downwards, this is going to the left. And so as expected, when you decrease the demand for a product and it's normal, then the price will go down, as will the quantity. So that pretty much outlines the two respective scenarios, but let's think about what could potentially cause these things to occur in the marketplace. So the first thing to think about in terms of factors that can shift the demand curve is to think about the number of buyers that there are in the market. So this is important because if you have a lot of buyers, then you may have a higher demand. So number of buyers is really important to consider when dealing with demands. So for example, if there were more buyers, then there might be higher demand because it's more competitive and more people want it, there's a higher demand for it. Whereas if there's less buyers, then demand may go down. And so this is something to consider, is the number of buyers in the marketplace. The second factor to consider is income, right? And so this is just the buying power of people, right? And this is important because if you have a lot of income and it's a normal good, then that means that as income goes up, the demand will go up as well. However, if you have an inferior good, then as income goes up, then the demand would go down. And so an example of an inferior good could perhaps be a value end product, right? When you are less fortunate in terms of your buying power, you may find it to be a normal good. However, as you continue to get wealthier, you may find that something like a hot dog becomes an inferior good, in which as you get a higher income, you have a lower demand for the hot dog because of the fact that you feel that you can eat finer food. So these are two things to consider in terms of the income side. The next thing to consider is the actual consumer preferences. So what are the tastes of consumers? So this means that, for example, if consumers really like this good or product, then they could potentially have a higher demand for it. However, if they did not necessarily prefer it over another alternative, then you might have a lower demand for it. So then the next thing to consider would be the actual price expectations. So price expectations are important because what that tells us is how we will respond to changes in this good. So if we expect the price of the good to go up in the future, then we may potentially have a higher demand today because we want to buy it up. So for example, a great example of this would be oil, because if we expect the oil prices to go up in the future, then we'll buy a lot of oil today since we can get it at a cheaper price. And so the price expectations are really important. And the last factor to consider are the price of related goods. So this could be in the form of two different types of products. The first is often referred to as a substitute, and the second is often referred to as a complement. So what does this mean? Well, if the price of a substitute goes up, then the demand of your product is going to go up. And this makes sense because if you were to think about it, this means that the other good is something that can replace your good, and there's little noticeable impact on the utility of a person. However, so in the case where the price of this alternative goes up, then the demand for your good is going to go up because people want to shift away from the substitute towards your own good. Whereas in the case of a complement, if the price of a complement went up, then the demand for your good would go down. And that's because of the fact that in order to just get, the full package, the full experience of your good, then the complement has now gone up, and therefore it's pricier to actually experience your good, and so the demand for your good will go down. So in factoring the shifts in demand, the things to consider are first, the number of buyers in the market. Are there a lot or are there very few? The second thing is the income of the overall market and the people that are purchasing. And then you want to consider things like the consumer preferences and tastes, the price expectations, as well as the price of related goods. That pretty much covers it for this video. In another video, we're going to cover the shifts in the supply curve and what are some influencing factors that contribute to that. But for now, I will see you guys next time.